Today on Mr. Media, I'll talk to humorist and editor Jamie Malanowski, perhaps best known for his years at Spy and Playboy magazines. He's just published a new book, And the War Came, The 6 Months That Tore America Apart. Stick around, except for you 19th century three-fingered vulgarian. So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview. You know, MrMedia.com, MRMedia.com? Stop by and check it out. There are more than 700 archived celebrity and pop culture interviews for your listening pleasure. The show is brought to you today by Audible. Audible is offering Mr. Media listeners a free audiobook download and a 14-day trial offer to give you a chance to check out their very cool service. I love listening to books on tape. If you've never tried it before, actors or sometimes the authors themselves read to you. It's great for the commute, the beach, or even unwinding before bed. And you can choose a free audiobook from Audible's enormous library of humor titles, including titles such as The National Lampoon Radio Hour or Bossy Pants by Tina Fey. You could also download The Profiler, written by famed criminal profiler Pat Brown and yours truly, which Pat will read to you personally. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/radio. Again, that's audibletrial.com/radio for your free audiobook. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience that includes folks who still haven't left my living room since the Tony Hendra interview in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. When I heard that Jamie Malanowski had penned a book about the days leading up to the American Civil War, I assumed it would be something along the lines of Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. You know, something absurdist that could read, if well crafted, as if it were true. Instead, the former Spy magazine writer and editor has produced something that is true, and we can only wish it chronicled something absurdist instead of reminding us that Obama versus the Tea Party is not unlike Lincoln versus the Confederacy. And the War Came, The 6 Months That Tore America Apart, originally appeared online in serialized form in the New York Times Opinionator web pages. It's a mesmerizing week-by-week account from the day of Abraham Lincoln's election through the secession of the southern states on up to the start of the Civil War. The book is currently available as an ebook, but a print-on-demand edition is in the works. As for Jamie Malanowski, he's enjoyed one of those careers guys like me can only envy from afar. Writer and editor for Spy magazine, managing editor of Playboy. Now, we could stop there. And he's also the author of a political novel. More recently, he's been doing ghostwriting and private editorial consultation. And it's a real pleasure to welcome him to the show. Jamie Malanowski, welcome to Mr. Media.
Thank you, Bob. Happy to be here.
Delighted to have you. It's a big honor for me. The Civil War by Jamie Malanowski. I mean, were you really surprised that I expected Sarah Palin, Glenn Beck, and Donald Trump to make appearances?
No, not at all. I'm just one of the lucky breaks was that the editor at the New York Times, who listened to me propose this, was George Kalogerakis, my colleague from Spy.
You had an in.
And so I was able to kind of get in the door, and he had faith in me that I could, Jerry Lewis in the Scorsese film could do serious work as well as satire. So, I got a chance to do it, and I'm really glad because it's a subject that I find always found very fascinating. An intensely political period that had so many of those what ifs, where history could have taken a slightly different course and things could have been very different.
So Abraham Lincoln could have been a vampire hunter.
He could have been, I suppose. It might have even worked out better for him.
So one of the things I'm wondering about the book is Did you was the idea to go out and find something new? And I understand when you were writing it for the New York Times, it wasn't a book at that point. But was it to go out and find something new about this period, or was it to bring together all these disparate elements that are now available to a researcher 150 years ago? Or where were you heading with this?
It was at first. I knew that people would be interested in doing something about the Civil War because the sesquicentennial was coming up. And so the idea was to try to be able to tell a familiar story in a way that was new and interesting to people who probably knew something about the period, but didn't know that much about the period. And so the idea that I proposed to them is let's blog the Civil War, and and bring these new techniques of storytelling and journalism to this period. And it turned out to be pretty rewarding, in part because we were able to get that kind of level of detail about, combined speeches and with diaries, with memoirs, and make it feel very personal and up to date rather than musty and old.
Yeah. So the next thing I was going to ask you about was actually about the way it was written, because and folks, you need to check this out and try this on for size. But you're reading it like it's being written at the time, kind of like a Newsweek or you were with Time Magazine, a Time Magazine version of the events leading up to the Civil War, a week's summary of it. But you have the benefit, as I'm reading it, of all the research and everything that's now known that was not known then. So I mean, if there was such a thing as blogging in 1865, you couldn't, you wouldn't have had this information. But now,
no, I mean, I think somebody said, why don't you just do the newspaper articles from this day? And you have the New York Times archive sitting there. Why don't you just do that? And one of the big reasons why is that they got a lot of things wrong, and also the standards of reporting. I mean, really wrong. Reporting people were dead that weren't dead, and so the standards have expanded, and also what we expect out of journalism in terms of color, access, inside information is really very different. So that they didn't have, I don't think they cultivated inside sources as much, so that when things happen now, somebody who has been in Obama's vest pocket who talks to them and tells what he's been thinking while he was making a decision. So a lot of those kinds of inside and the little asides, the comments, the how things actually happen, had to wait for memoirs and had to wait for or the discovery of letters and things that happen much later. So by essentially recombining all that information, but treating it as though it was current and contemporaneous, you got something much more vivid and alive that you could have had any other way.
So you're saying there was no Bob Woodward living up Abraham Lincoln's butt at the time?
Not that I'm aware of. But he had secretaries, who then, 20 years after his death wrote their memoir. And it was intensely personal and highly revelatory. I mean, I love the fact that, after all the debating about what they were going to do about Fort Sumter in April of 1961, Lincoln finally said, let's go ahead and reinforce this thing. He had a migraine headache the whole next day and eventually collapsed as a result of it. That's just not something you ever pick up in high school history. Mm-hmm. But it's that's sort of very personal revelation about the torture that he must have been feeling while, racking his head as to what he's going to do about this essentially unsolvable situation at that point. I thought it was just great. I mean, it really makes you see people very vividly. And there's lots of those kinds of things, people whose little off-the-cuff witticisms are very funny and very acerbic, and people behave like jerks, and there's big arguments in the cabinet, and all kinds of things that you never really expect when you get that kind of view of history that's landmark to landmark. Lincoln was elected, the South secedes. When you just go landmark to landmark, you miss all the grit.
One of the things I found fascinating about that era, And I recalled thinking about it as I was reading the beginning, when the election returns were coming in, and we take for granted that we can have election returns in a flash now. It was 150 years ago, and yet, thanks to the telegraph, they're getting fairly quick results of elections, and we don't think about them having technology like that at the time.
Right.
They can do that, and I just, I just thought that was a fascinating thing to think about.
It is amazing the role of the telegraph. I mean, when and a similar situation was when the Confederacy was trying to work out when and how they were going to actually fire on Fort Sumter. They had people on the scene in Charleston Harbor who were telegraphing messages to the Confederate officials in Montgomery, and hour by hour, they were able to go through a whole series of steps about, how to actually come to the decision. And so, the telegraph was huge.
Now, you're, I think of you as a New York guy mostly because of Spy, but where are you originally from?
I was born and raised in Baltimore and lived there till I went away to college, and then spent 6 years in Philadelphia, and then went to New York.
Okay, so you are a Yankee by birth, and you've grown up basically here. Did you, in doing this, I didn't get any sense of particular sympathy for the South in the book. However, I am wondering, as you read this, did you get any perspective on the South's agony through all this, or their obviously, the steadfastness comes through very clearly in the book, but did anything that you researched or learned change your view about why they did what they did?
The thing that really changed was I was confronted more clearly than I had ever expected just how fiercely they believed in slavery and how strongly they were determined to keep their property. And because now you kind of hear it all kicked around, it's part of tariffs and, is the agriculture versus the industry and stuff like that. But when you actually read the speeches and you actually read the ordinances of secession, it's about slavery. It's about keeping slaves and about having the freedom to expand their slave empire. And so, and all I can say is I tried as best I could to kind of play it down the middle, not disguise that, not sugarcoat it, not couch it in any other language, but at the same time just sort of accept that that was their view. And as harsh and horrifying as it sounds to our ears today. So, you just kind of present it as what they had to say and let it speak for itself.
Now, one of the differences between the e-book and what appeared in the New York Times is these verbatim sections that you've added, right? And
yes.
What I found interesting, a lot of them are editorials from newspapers that are long lost to history, but they're very interesting because they remind me of a lot of right-wing literature today, in that they start off sounding very logical and very sincere and very straightforward, and then they cannot have our slaves. Slaves are who we are. This is slaves. We own slaves. The slaves are, whatever. They're just their chattel. They're property. They're not people, or whatever it would say. And I just thought, wow. The parallels to, and you could drop in there today anything. You could drop in there healthcare. You could drop in, the rantings of Ron Paul and his son, Rand Paul. Anything. It just nothing's changed.
Yeah, exactly. So many newspapers of the time were house organs of parties or political factions, and so they spoke for particular points of view, and there was no trying to temper their feelings. They really piled it on thick, and what was even kind of difficult in collecting those verbatim quotes was knowing that in a place like Georgia, for example, where it kind of ran 50-50 as to whether or not they wanted to secede or not, was finding any kind of Georgia Unionist quotes. The press really seemed to be dominated by the secessionists. That was the thing that was really very striking to me, was just to the degree to which this wasn't a case of the South seceding, but really a kind of conspiracy of slaveholders, of property interests who manipulated public opinion and the political apparatus to engineer a rebellion. And somehow through Reconstruction and the passage of time, somehow it made it seem as though there was some sort of spiritual movement, or I don't know what, that led all Southerners to decide that it was time to get up and go. When in fact it really was the prosecution of this small cabal.
Am I making this? Am I minimizing this too much by saying that if today this would not be unlike the whole healthcare battle in some ways, and that there's people who, I mean, I don't want to compare healthcare to the Civil War, just like I don't want to hear anyone on the other side saying that making us have healthcare is like Hitler or Stalin. But it seems like the people who have the most to gain from wide open healthcare and no controls on prices or any of that are the people who seem to be pushing that there be no universal healthcare in the country, no matter what argument they have to make to win people over.
The deeper I draw a comparison, the spongier ground I'm standing on, just because I'm more outside of my own expertise. But I mean, certain parallels are really true. Moneyed interests, acting behind the scenes to fund passionate activists who care about the issue, and to inflame propaganda. The phrases like death panels and so forth, that over-the-top kind of stuff, it pretty well parallels the kinds of statements that you heard from Southerners talking about how Northern agitators were going to come down and get our slaves to revolt. And so, there were these kinds of apocalyptic fear-mongering that, that was engaged in. And, of course, the fact that John Brown did happen, that a group of Northerners did come down and try to engineer a big rebellion, just fed into that kind of paranoia and caused it to burn out of control.
Now, Lincoln didn't, and you certainly correct me if I get this wrong, Lincoln didn't come to office with having it in mind that he was going to turn the whole system upside down. He was probably looking more for cooperation and compromise, and was pushed by events and the actions of the South to do what he wound up having to do.
Lincoln had one goal in mind as regards to slavery, which was to limit its spread. He said many times before the election and afterwards that wherever slavery exists now, you have no fear from me. So he wasn't going to overturn it. But the belief was, North and South, abolitionist and slaveholder, was that slavery, which was limited, was an institution that was going to die. So that, and I must say, I can't quite figure out why they thought that necessarily, but everyone felt that slavery had to keep expanding and growing, or else it was just going to die as an institution. And whether that was going to be down to Cuba or Nicaragua or out west, or the slaveholders hated that they didn't get a share of California. So that to that degree, Lincoln didn't want to do something immediately, but everyone kind of could read the code. That when Lincoln said, "I just don't want it to spread," it was really the beginning of the end of this institution. And the reason why the slaveholders needed to act so fast, and some of the most interesting parts of the book are just watching how rapidly they manipulated this. It was almost like a Beatlemania or a internet bubble or something. In 7 weeks, they had 7 states seceding. Just amazing. Was they said it was the coming of the Republicans through Lincoln that was going to start this whole, that was going to be the end of slavery. And I don't think certain people said, well, let's wait and see what the guy does. But I think if they had waited to see what Lincoln actually did, he would have they would have seen he didn't really pose an immediate threat, and a lot of the steam would have gone out of the rebellion.
Wasn't there a line in the book, and I don't have it in front of me, something about how before Lincoln, the Southerners were upset and were threatening to secede, and then they in Congress, and they went out and they had a drink, and they came back and they settled down, and the estimate was that they were going to go, this because of Lincoln, they'd go out and they'd have to have 2 drinks, and then they'd come back and they wouldn't secede and they'd settle down.
Right. I mean, I think one of the things that Lincoln clearly did not appreciate the seriousness that the slaveholders brought to this particular moment. And they thought it was just more old kind of agitation that they had seen since John Calhoun in 1830, and that they were going to, get up and, just threaten to go home to mother. And at the end of the day, they were going to come back in and get a new piece of jewelry or a new tea set or something. Everybody was going to be happy again. But Lincoln clearly underestimated that. And you see it that he made after he left Springfield in February of 61, and started to come east on this kind of 13-day victory tour through the North, he was saying, we really don't have anything serious. This isn't really a very serious problem. And people are saying, man, 7 states have seceded. They're down there forming a government. What are you saying? It was really one of the times you see this man who is a great president, we always think of him as the man of marble, was actually a kind of, working politician trying to work out a theme. He was trying to cool people down, not rise to debate, but you could see, I'll float this phrase, okay, after 2 or 3 times, it's not really working, I'm going to put it back in the cupboard. So you see the man trying to figure out the problem.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about some magazine work you may be familiar with having done. This is Bob Andelman, and you're listening to and hopefully watching the Mr. Media interview with former Spy and Playboy magazine editor Jamie Malanowski, whose new book is And the War Came, the 6 months that tore America apart. And we'll be right back. Hey folks, you can hear Mr. Media while on the go now with Stitcher Smart Radio. Stitcher is a free news and talk mobile app available for your smartphone, whether you use an iPhone, iPod Touch, Android, BlackBerry Curve, or Palm Pre. And when you download Stitcher to hear Mr. Media today, you have a chance to win some real money. Downloading is quick and easy. Just find Stitcher in your smartphone's app store. Download it, it's free, takes seconds. Then, during registration, hit the promo code box and enter Mr. Media, that's MR Media, to get automatically entered to win $100. The latest episode of Mr. Media will be waiting for you in Stitcher's favorites right on your phone. You'll get access to lots of other amazing shows, too, always available to you on demand, no syncing. Some of my favorites include WTF with Mark Maron, Plus One Per Diem with Kevin Smith, and The Nerdist with Chris Hardwick. It's all free and all instant to you on Stitcher Smart Radio. And don't forget to win the money. Enter promo code Mr. Media, MR Media, when you register. And thanks for listening.
Hello, this is novelist Michael Connelly, and you're listening to Mr. Media.
This is Bob Andelman, and you're listening to and hopefully watching the Mr. Media interview with former Spy and Playboy magazine editor Jamie Malanowski, whose new book is And the War Came, the 6 months that tore America apart. Jamie, we got to talk a lot between segments, and I gather you do not mind if we talk a little bit about Spy and about Playboy.
No.
All right. So at Spy, you were responsible for a lot of the brilliant work in the fine print, which for people who may not recall or never saw it, Spy, one of the many things that it did that kind of revolutionized print magazines at the time was in the opening section of the book, down the left and the right column, there'd be this really tiny type that was just packed with material. And I wondered if you had any particular favorites from that time.
There are a couple things that really stand out. One, I had a transcript of a bunch of Republican senators talking to Saddam Hussein that had been referenced but not quoted in a William Safire column. And I said, well, this is really weird. Let me just go get it. And it's all these quotes of people like Bob Dole and so forth flattering Saddam Hussein, who was at that time about to go off the deep end. But they were trying to, in a diplomatic way, I guess, make nice with him and keep him from doing terrible stuff. But, of course, flattery reads poorly. I mean, it reflects poorly on the flatterer. So you should never allow yourself to be recorded when committing flattery. So that was one I always really liked. It was not one of the, I mean, people will always look at like the restaurant health code violations as among their very favorites.
Reading my mind.
People love that, but it was so easy to do that I never really liked it. And it was, I felt it was like, I felt like that musician who keeps constantly being asked to play his hit. Because people say, why don't you do more restaurant health code violations? I'm like, oh, come on, it's just so boring. You just have to go over to the health department, they give it to you. It's so simple. So I did it because people loved it, but it was never one of my particular favorites. I like the ones that had that were a little harder to find and a little more rewarding. I remember one time we did one that was just all about lawsuits that Sylvester Stallone was involved in. and apparently it was like 15 of them. And he was suing his landscaper, and he was suing a guy who did, work on his cars, and he was suing his neighbor because the neighbor's tree. And all of a sudden you get this image of this amazing litigious guy who sues about every little thing. It was really revelatory. It's something you never would have expected of anybody, let alone, Rocky. But here he was suing everybody that he ever apparently crossed his path and looked at him funny. So I like that one all a lot. I liked one we did one time where we did all of the New York City Consumer Protection had a squad of people who went out and made for bingo games in the city were on the up and up. I don't know. I guess maybe there was a time when, I don't know, it was in the hands of the mafia. I don't know when. But, you got all of these really, once you read the record of the violations, it was, somebody didn't have the right colored chips. And it was hilarious to see, Saint Roman and Kazimierz, Lithuanian Catholic Church written up for, some sort of minor violation and getting a $15 fine. It was just, I thought it was hilarious. And soon after we published, they closed the bingo squad. So, but that was one of my favorites.
Was there a written standard at SPY for what was a fine print item and what wasn't, or was it something that you guys on the staff just knew what was and what wasn't?
There were. The standard was anything that was actually in print. So you didn't go out and report these things or follow up with interviews or get somebody else to interpret. It was just stuff that would stand alone on print and kind of, and the model was, a government agency record or something like that. But you ended up with transcripts. You ended up with, we did something that was pretty great one time, which was just the synopsis of a federal agent's filing in support of a continued wiretap on a suspected syndicate figure in Los Angeles. And so it wasn't any of the dialogue that they overheard, but it was just like in Section 1 to Section 50, suspect Bob Andelman was overheard speaking to, and then it'd be some famous person, and then it'd be suspect Bob Andelman was then, interviewing, this famous rock star. And it was all of a sudden you realized, what the hell is going on here? That this man's having all these conversations with all these people, and it was illuminating. It was illuminating to see what was going on.
And that was, I mean, you would read about a person or a place or an institution, and it seemed to supply information. I don't know, maybe you could say colored in around the edges a little bit, and when you put all of these bits together, you got a very different picture than if, say, Vanity Fair had profiled the same person or institution.
Yeah, exactly. And in some ways, because you weren't trying to make some contentious point, your obligation to be fair was obviated in some way. I mean, all you're doing is putting down what's here on this piece of paper. I don't have to be fair to the piece of paper. Somebody's going to repeat it. And so it was interesting. It was... and then other things were just, I mean, one of my favorite things was just a long list of the amount of junk that went up into NASA space shuttle missions. Because they would take all these little, you're an astronaut and you would take up 10 rolls of dimes. And so that you would come back to Earth and, give away, this dime was in space. You'd have 500 little American flags. There's all these little gewgaws and, souvenir stuff. It was really weird that this is all being included in your space dollars. So that was fun. Those were all fun.
Now, I spent a lot of time in the 80s in newsrooms, in the St. Pete Times and the Tampa Tribune, and being around a lot of magazines. And maybe it's in my mind, but I kind of I want to think that there was something special about being around the offices at SPY. Would I be wrong about that?
It was the best place I ever worked, and it was a place where I went and I laughed every day, which hasn't happened since. I mean, not every day. And it was hilarious. And you always there was a sense of, like a lot of little laboratories where people were always working on, people were cooking up a prank. Somebody else was, John Connolly was doing an investigation. Somebody else was, had some other funny thing going on. You had people coming in who had been to, Bohemian Grove or someplace with their stories. It was, sort of a constant show. It was great.
Now, one more question about SPY. I mentioned to you during the break, I had this handy. This, of course, is SPY, The Funny Years by... I'll get them in order. Kurt Anderson, Graydon Carter, and of course your pal George Kalogerakis. Was there anything in this book? Was there anything left out of this book that you wish that the guys had told? Any story or any anecdote where after you read it, you went, you missed a really good one?
I must say I didn't commit the book to memory, so I don't really know what they might have left out or didn't leave out. I would say one thing that, the contributions of my colleague, Susan Morrison, I didn't think got quite the credit that she deserved there. But anyway, but I mean, there were a lot of funny things that we did. One of the funniest, and I really don't know whether they got to go into it in depth, was we created an agent named Jack Fine who called up TV shows, crappy TV shows like Full House. And Jack would say, to get a producer on the line, and he'd say, I represent Max von Sydow or me or, Vanessa Redgrave or some really eminent person. Vanessa really loves the show, and she's wondering if you could, figure out a character for her to be on. And these people would just trip over themselves trying to figure out how to get Vanessa Redgrave onto Full House. And it was so funny, and it was so mean to these poor people. We had to kill Jack off because we loved him too much. We wanted to play with him more and more, and it was just too mean. So after we had Jack do that, then the next week we killed Jack. And then, went around and got quotes from people who expressed their sympathy, people like Liz Smith and so forth, who printed sympathy, lines of sympathy for this man who never existed. But that was the last time we played with him. But I really liked Jack. and he was a lot of fun.
That's funny. Well, let's jump ahead now. In 2004, you joined Playboy, and I remember when I first saw your name in there, I thought, is this Playboy trying to capture a little bit of that spy magic? Or, I mean, what was kind of you didn't go in as ME, as I recall. I think you went in.
No, I was there about 6 months before I became managing editor.
And what were they looking for when they hired Jamie Malanowski at Playboy? What are they looking for?
Well, I think basically they were looking for a magazine professional who, had a sense of humor, but who could do a lot of different things. And after I left Spy, I worked at a lot of different places. I've always freelanced at a lot of places. I did worked at Time for a while, worked at Entertainment Weekly for a while, worked at Esquire for a while. So I developed a lot of different capabilities beyond strictly humor stuff I could do at Spy. And so I think they appreciated my versatility. I had written a number of pieces for Playboy from the editor Chris Napolitano prior to 2004. So he kind of, knew what he was getting, and he had a reasonably young staff. And I think he thought an opportunity to kind of hire someone who could be the club pro, in a way, and add, just that little note of professionalism that would help them perfect their acts.
Now, what did you expect Playboy to be like to work for, and what was it actually like? Was there a difference between the two?
I thought the big thing that was a surprise about working at Playboy was that it was a very formulaic magazine. I mean, basically it had a winning formula, and so they thought, why mess with it? And so there was not much, there was not that sense of urgency to let's figure out something new and different. It was let's deliver on the specs of the thing every month. And so people got good at doing that. And whenever we would, get excited about doing something different, invariably Hefner would shoot it down because Hefner wasn't interested in expanding the kind of creative portfolio of the magazine. He was interested in sort of, delivering, the dog likes the dog food, let's bring the dog food. So that's a little unkind way to put it. But basically, if you like last month's issue, you'll like this month's issue, and you'll like next month's issue too.
Well, and it's funny. I know as someone who read and subscribed to that magazine for 30 years. I mean, I started getting it when I was, I've told this before on the show, I started getting it when I was 13. I actually subscribed and continued getting it for years and years and years. And only, 2 or 3 years ago, actually stopped the subscription. Part of it is, you've seen one, you've seen them both, and when you've seen them both 100,000 times, you can be a little jaded. But really, it was what you described. It kind of reached a point where I felt like I was reading the same thing month after month. Celebrities were not as prone to either be interviewed or, in the women's case, to be photographed by them because there were so many other places that they could go and maybe have more control over it or just have a different experience. That it wasn't compelling. I mean, even the interview wasn't as compelling after a certain point as it used to be. They were, and I think some of this is generational. You reach a point where they're interviewing people for 10 or 15 pages. I don't even know who these people are anymore.
Right.
And I think they're, Monday morning quarterbacking. I mean, I think now they're paying a price for staying with the same formula for so long.
It's. I worked at Playboy, which had just celebrated its 50th anniversary before I got there. I worked at Us, which was next to Rolling Stone, which had been around a very long time. Worked at Time, which celebrated its 75th anniversary while I was there. All magazines, have a kind of middle-aged, midlife crisis where, where they need to change, but change is enormously risky because you alienate the group that got you to this point of popularity. There was a point in the 70s when Playboy was selling 7.5 million copies a month. 7.5 million. Now it's down to around 2 million, I think, 2.2.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on the exact number. I might be wrong by a bit. But, once they started losing, which was well before I was there, but once they started losing, I don't think they really knew what to do. So they just kind of kept doubling down on the things they thought they were doing well. And it became difficult to adapt. And I do think that, Hefner was a kind of a brilliant editor, magazine editor. I mean, at one point in time, in the 50s and 60s, his view of the world that he was able to manifest in the magazine was kind of like a thing that men wanted. It was really brilliant. But he lost that, and yet still could control the magazine, and it still tended to reflect his interests long past the time when it ought to have been passed to somebody else who would have innovated in a different way.
I think two cautionary tales come to mind. Newsweek a couple of years ago basically was forced to go in and hack everything it did to death and become it was just a graveyard of opinion pieces that you didn't even know who this person was who was offering their opinion, and they damn near died because of that. And I think I give her credit. I think Tina Brown's done a real good job of reviving that. But then I think the way that Playboy might have succeeded in going is what David Granger has done with Esquire. I gave up Esquire for dead years ago, and it just seems like now every month I get it. Yeah, there's still some months where I find nothing to read, but on the whole, I look forward to getting it because it just seems to capture the moment very well. And they've actually gone in Playboy's direction a little bit. There's a lot of naughty pictures. There's so anyway, just
I agree. I like Esquire very, very much, and I think they do a good job. And there's always stuff that's interesting to read. Like GQ is another men's magazine that does pretty well. I think one of the things that there was a point in time when Playboy was cutting edge in terms of its coverage of sexuality and sexual issues, and now it is no longer that. And now it is wallpaper on the party bus or something. It's just not. It's no longer, and maybe cannot even aspire to being that, having that status. But if that's what I would try to recover, that sense of, and Playboy is still one of the very few magazines that treats sexual issues seriously. Our friend Chip Rowe writes about them, that they talk about sexual phenomenon and people's sexual interests and their issues. They treat it very seriously and honorably and with kind of intellectual credibility. And a lot of other publications are silly about it or nonsensical about it. So, I would have tried to somehow continue to maintain Playboy's unique selling proposition in the way that they once earned it.
I'd love to see Chip get a shot at the editor's chair one day before his run there completes. I'd be curious to see what he does with it. And the last thing I'll say about Playboy, and we'll start to wrap up, is the thing I've tried to point out to them is I don't know if you ever get to listen to Playboy Radio. It's on Sirius and wherever else. I think Playboy Radio should be the model for what they do with the magazine in the future. I think they capture that combination. They're not serious. They don't, in terms of serious topics, they don't have that. But if they could bring the fun and the sexuality of Playboy Radio to the magazine and integrate some of those elements, I think they'd get themselves another generation of readership. But
the best manifestation of Playboy and the Playboy kind of attitude and message was Sex and the City. Best one in recent.
It was
Sex in the City.
Oh, yeah.
Those four women were Playboy men of 1964. And somehow, so this idea was alive. They just were knocking on the wrong door or whatever. But there was, it's out there someplace to be captured.
Well, Jamie, we've covered a lot of stuff. This has been a great treat for me. So you've got a book out now, and The War Came.
Yes.
Are you working on something new, or do you have a? And I have to ask: is there a website? Can people find you at all online anywhere?
I do have my own website, JamieMalanowski.com. I have a blog there. I'm not working on anything right now. We're working very hard on the Civil War book, on The War Came, and so we're kind of catching our breath. And I'm doing some other work for some other folks, but I've got a few ideas that I'm flirting with, and we'll see what comes around.
Very good. Well, folks, listen, you can order Jamie Malanowski's new book, And the War Came, the 6 months that tore America apart, at great ebook stores everywhere, or you can order it right now at a great price at MrMedia.com. And Jamie, boy, what a fun time this has been for me. I appreciate you enduring all the questions and the Inquisition. Unique.
Let's do it again. I enjoyed it.
That'd be great. Unique moment for me. And thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media today.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thank you.
And folks, of course, for more original interviews with America's top authors, you can surf over to our main website, mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com. If you've enjoyed today's show, subscribe for free to Mr. Media via email, RSS, or iTunes, or check out our new, I can't believe I'm saying this, our new app, mobile app. It's in the Android marketplace, hopefully coming soon to the iTunes store, the Apple App Store. But it's Mr. Media Interviews. Just look that up in the marketplace. You can also listen with a piece of string and a tin can in many parts of Manhattan. Show your support of Mr. Media by supporting our sponsors, including Audible. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/radio. Again, that's audibletrial.com/radio for your free audiobook. We're also supported by thepartyauthority.us. Call DJ Ira for all your party entertainment needs nationwide at 1-800-DIAL-DJs. Or visit their website. I lost my place. Visit their website, thepartyauthority.us. If you've got an idea for a guest, a comment on today's show, or would like to advertise on Mr. Media, email me directly at bob@mrmedia.com. You can also call our 24-hour listener line, 1-727-498-4711, to leave a message. Now, some messages may be used in an upcoming show, and depending on where you're calling from, there may be a toll charge. You can also follow Mr. Media on Facebook, Twitter, or our new YouTube video channel. Thanks so much for joining us. I always appreciate you giving up a piece of your day and spending it with us. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you next time, everybody. Hey folks, you can hear Mr. Media while on the go now with Stitcher Smart Radio. Stitcher is a free news and talk mobile app available for your smartphone, whether you use an iPhone, iPod Touch, Android, BlackBerry Curve, or Palm Pre. And when you download Stitcher to hear Mr. Media today, you have a chance to win some real money. Downloading is quick and easy. Just find Stitcher in your smartphone's app store. Download it, it's free, takes seconds. Then, during registration, hit the promo code box and enter Mr. Media, that's MR Media, to get automatically entered to win $100. The latest episode of Mr. Media will be waiting for you in Stitcher's favorites right on your phone. You'll get access to lots of other amazing shows, too, always available to you on demand, no syncing. Some of my favorites include WTF with Mark Maron, Plus One Per Diem with Kevin Smith, and The Nerdist with Chris Hardwick. It's all free and all instant to you on Stitcher Smart Radio. And don't forget to win the money. Enter promo code Mr. Media, MR Media, when you register. And thanks for listening.
Now, this is the amazing Kreskin. If you could read my thoughts, you'd know you're listening to Mr. Media Radio.